Israel knew Hamas's attack plan more than a year ago. New York Times. A blueprint reviewed by the Times laid out the attack in detail. Israeli officials dismissed it as aspirational and ignored specific warnings. Hamas-led gunmen seized an Israeli military vehicle after infiltrating areas of southern Israel during the October 7th attacks. A blueprint for similar attacks was circulating among Israeli leaders long before Hamas struck. Israeli officials obtained Hamas's battle plan for the October 7th terrorist attack more than a year before it happened. Documents, emails, and interviews show, but Israeli military and intelligence officials dismissed the plan as aspirational, considering it too difficult for Hamas to carry out. I call bullshit. False flag! It's pretty obvious. The approximately 40-page document, which the Israeli authorities codenamed Jericho Wall, outlined point by point exactly the kind of devastation invasion that led to the deaths of about 1,200 people. The translated document, which was reviewed by the New York Times, did not set a date for the attack, but described a methodical assault designed to overwhelm the fortifications around the Gaza Strip, take over Israeli cities, and storm key military bases, including a division headquarters. Hamas followed the blueprint with shocking precision. Oh, shocking. Well, the document called for a barrage of rockets at the outset of the attack, drones to knock out security cameras, and automated machine guns along the border, and gunmen to pour into Israel en masse in paragliders, on motorcycles, and on foot, all of which happened on October 7th. The plan also included details about the location and size of Israeli military forces, communication hubs, and other sensitive information, raising questions about how Hamas gathered its intelligence and whether there were leaks inside the Israeli security establishment. Well, it's pretty obvious. Hamas was a creation of Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu has, made some interesting statements prior to this years ago that, they should fund and support Hamas, so to keep the chaos going with the Palestinians, so that way there's no move for a Palestinian state, whatnot. Just all this evidence and just a bunch of disgusting pieces of shit. The document circulated widely among Israeli military and intelligence leaders, but experts determined that an attack of that scale and ambition was beyond Hamas's capabilities. According to documents and officials, of course it was, but with the help of you guys, the Zio-fascist state, Hamas was able to do that. It is unclear whether Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu or other top political leaders saw the document as well. Last year, shortly after the document was obtained, officials in the Israeli military's Gaza division, which is responsible for defending the border with Gaza, said that Hamas's intentions were unclear. All their intentions were clear, all right. It was to create a terrorist event so that way Israel could justify doing what they're doing right now. Genociding Palestinians. It is not yet possible to determine whether the plan has been fully accepted and how it will be manifested, read a military assessment review by the Times. Then in July, just 3 months before the attacks, a veteran analyst with Unit 8200, Israel's signals intelligence agency, warned that Hamas had conducted an intense day-long training exercise that appeared similar to what was outlined in the blueprint. But a colonel in the Gaza division brushed off her concerns, according to encrypted emails viewed by the Times. You'd have to be an idiot at this point to not scratch your head and go, definitely there's more to what's going on than what they're giving out. I mean, clearly, with Israel's top-notch security, technology, surveillance, whatnot. They have the most sophisticated in the world. No fucking way could Hamas have done what it had done without the help of the Mossad. They at least let them come in. Like I said, it's problem, reaction, solution. Their solution. Which is, basically wreaking havoc over there, the Palestinians, so that way they can expand their borders. I utterly refute that the scenario is imaginary, the analyst wrote in the email exchanges. The Hamas training exercise, she said, fully matched the content of Jericho Wall. It is a plan designed to start a war, she added. It's not just a raid on a village. Officials privately concede that had the military taken these warnings seriously and redirected significant reinforcements to the south where Hamas attacked, Israel could have blunted the attacks or possibly even prevented them. But they weren't going to do that because they wanted this war. We didn't even call it a war. Instead, the Israeli military was unprepared as terrorists streamed out of the Gaza Strip. It was the deadliest day in Israel's history. Unprepared. Israeli security officials have already acknowledged that they failed to protect the country. And the government is expected to assemble a commission to study the events leading up to the attacks. And of course, you're just going to have, this is all just set up and damage control and stuff. They're just going to, it's going to go down in history as just something that, just their security, just slipped, It wasn't a false flag. They leak this stuff out and they reveal this kind of stuff. That way, the general public who really don't do much, research into anything, let alone even know about false flags. They're never taught in their government-run public schools about false flags. They're just going to read this and go, yep, see, Alan, there's no, there was no conspiratorial thing here. It was incompetence. Just like with 9/11, all the security stuff involving that. NORAD being told to stand down, and just a whole array of stuff. I don't fully remember everything. I'd have to, revisit that probably at some point, but they're just the same shit. Same assholes doing the same fucking shit. The Jericho Wall document lays bare a years-long cascade of missteps that culminated in what officials now regard as the worst Israeli intelligence failure since the surprise attack that led to the Arab-Israel War of 1973. I'd argue that one, too, was no surprise attack. Again, Israel was caught trying to stage a terror attack, the Levant affair, before, but we're caught with that. Oh, but they would never do that with this event, They must really think, which in a lot of ways, they're kind of right. The general public are pretty much gone. I mean, they are, some are smart, but just don't give a shit. The other group are just dumbed down and distracted. The people in the middle, the people like me and others who do care about the truth, it don't matter much because we're really small in number, I would have to say. But a majority of people are just, so they are right, most people are stupid, but we're not stupid, or at least we're not mindless sheep type people. But like I said, they don't really give a shit about that because, we've been dismissed as quote-unquote conspiracy theorists. Underpinning all these failures was a single, fatally inaccurate belief that Hamas lacked the capability to attack and would not dare to do so. That belief was so ingrained in the Israeli government, officials said, that they disregarded growing evidence to the contrary. The Israeli military and the Israeli Security Agency, which is in charge of counterterrorism in Gaza, declined to comment. Of course. Officials will not say how they obtained the Jericho Wall document, but it was among several versions of attack plans collected over the years. A 2016 Defense Ministry memorandum viewed by the Times, for example, says Hamas intends to move the next confrontation into Israeli territory. Such an attack would most likely involve hostage-taking, occupying an Israeli community, and perhaps even a number of communities, the memo reads. The Jericho Wall document, named for the ancient fortifications in the modern-day West Bank, was even more explicit. It detailed rocket attacks to distract Israeli soldiers and send them hurrying into bunkers and drones to disable the elaborate security measures along the border fence separating Israel and Gaza. Hamas fighters would then break through 60 points in the wall, storming across the border into Israel. The document begins with a quote from the Quran: "Surprise them through the gate. If you do, you will certainly prevail." The same phrase has been widely used by Hamas in its video and statements since October 7th. One of the most important objectives outlined in the document was to overrun the Israeli military base in Reem, which is home to the Gaza division responsible for protecting the region. Other bases that fell under the division's command were also listed. Hamas carried out that objective on October 7th, rampaging through Reem and overrunning parts of the base. The audacity of the blueprint, officials said, made it easy to underestimate all militaries write plans that they never use, and Israeli officials assessed that, even if Hamas invaded, it might muster a force of a few dozen, not the hundreds, who ultimately attacked. Israel had also misread Hamas's actions. I'm sure they did. The group had negotiated for permits to allow Palestinians to work in Israel, which Israeli officials took as a sign that Hamas was not looking for a war. But Hamas had been drafting attack plans for many years, and Israeli officials had gotten hold of previous iterations of them. What could have been an intelligence coup turned into one of the worst miscalculations in Israel's 75-year history. Again, I call total BS. In September 2016, the Defense Minister's Office compiled a top-secret memorandum based on a much earlier iteration of a Hamas attack plan. The memorandum, which was signed by the Defense Minister at the time, Avigdor Lieberman, said that an invasion and hostage-taking would lead to severe damage to the consciousness and morale of the citizens of Israel. The memo, which was viewed by the Times, said that Hamas had purchased sophisticated weapons, GPS jammers, and drones. It also said that Hamas had increased its fighting force to 27,000 people, having added 6,000 to its ranks in a 2-year period. Hamas had hoped to reach 40,000 by 2020, the memo determined. Last year, after Israel obtained the Jericho Wall document, the military's Gaza division drafted its own intelligence assessment of this latest invasion plan. Hamas had decided to plan a new raid, unprecedented in its scope, analysts wrote in the assessment reviewed by the Times. It said that Hamas intended to carry out a deception operation followed by a large-scale maneuver with the aim of overwhelming the division. But the Gaza division referred to the plan as a compass. In other words, the division determined that Hamas knew where it wanted to go but had not arrived there yet. On July 6, 2023, the veteran Unit 8200 analyst wrote to a group of other intelligence experts that dozens of Hamas commandos had recently conducted training exercises with senior Hamas commanders, observing. The training included a dry run of shooting down Israeli aircraft and taking over a kibbutz and a military training base, killing all the cadets. During the exercise, Hamas fighters used the same phrase from the Quran that appeared at the top of the Jericho Wall attack plan, she wrote in the email exchanges viewed by the Times. The analyst warned that the drill closely followed the Jericho Wall plan and that Hamas was building the capacity to carry it out. The colonel in the Gaza division applauded the analysis, but said the exercise was part of a totally imaginative scenario, not an indication of Hamas's ability to pull it off. In short, let's wait patiently, the colonel wrote. The back and forth continued, with some colleagues supporting the analyst's original conclusion. Soon, she invoked the lessons of the 1973 war, in which the Syrian and Egyptian armies overran Israeli defenses. Israeli forces regrouped and repelled the invasion, but the intelligence failure has long served as a lesson for Israeli security officials. Again, it's always intelligence failure with these events. 9/11, you can go all the way back to Pearl Harbor. These things are allowed to happen or staged completely by governments, intelligence agencies, rogue elements of the military, whatever, as a means to justify going into a country or a place, blowing shit up with the support of the general public. You cannot do that unless you have a tragic event happen to get people stirred up and angry and want revenge, and people just your average general public just listens to the news and just accepts what's said. We already underwent a similar experience 50 years ago on the Southern Front in connection with a scenario that seemed imaginary, and history may repeat itself if we are not careful, the analyst wrote to her colleagues. While ominous, none of the emails predicted that war was imminent, nor did the analyst challenge the conventional wisdom among Israeli intelligence officials that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, was not interested in war with Israel, but she correctly assessed that Hamas's capabilities had drastically improved. The gap between the possible and the aspirational had narrowed significantly. The failures to connect the dots echoed another analytical failure more than 2 decades ago, when the American authorities also had multiple indications that the terrorist group Al-Qaeda was preparing an assault. That's meaning that CIA created Al-Qaeda. You remember that movie Rambo 3? Came out in the late 80s. Rambo was, helping to defend Al-Qaeda against the Soviets, and they were celebrated as freedom fighters until, of course, they allegedly attacked us. The September 11, 2001 attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon were largely a failure. Yeah, I'm sure it was. Of analysis and imagination, a government commission concluded. Of course, they're going to conclude that. The Israeli intelligence failure on October 7th is sounding more and more like our 9/11. Of course, because it was a false flag like 9/11. Said Ted Singer, a recently retired senior CIA official who worked extensively in the Middle East. The failure will be a gap in analysis to paint a convincing picture to military and political leadership that Hamas had the intention to launch the attack when it did. Ignored warnings. Of course, you have all this shit going on, but I want to focus on what was I going to look up? Oh, okay. Before I do that, I was going to look up false flags, but I don't want to read this entire article, but this Vigilant Citizen website's pretty good. This person who did the article breaks it down very well. Just look this up, and I'm subscribed to this, so maybe I can read it because of that. Maybe you might have to subscribe to it, but points out, some really good stuff here. Why powerful Israel did not see the Hamas attack coming, and how they have a spy satellite, OFEC 13. Of course, you have that occult, 13. Number symbolizing the phoenix. And Hamas does not care about Gaza. I mean, look at these scumbags. But I want to show the entire article that's theirs, whatnot. Times of India. This pops up anyway. Yep. Hamas's top 3 leaders are worth staggering $11 billion. They enjoy the high life while the Palestinians they are supposedly defending or trying to fight for are suffering. We are not idiots. I am not an idiot. If they were a real organization that claims to care about these people, they wouldn't be living the high life in these places far away. They are used by the Israeli government, Hamas, as a creation to act as a controlled opposition. Like I said, as long as they have terrorist organizations like Hamas, governing places like Palestine or Gaza, Israel keeps having the Israel can continue to justify its treatment of the Palestinians. So, and where are these fuckers in Hamas? Should we really believe the news when they tell us that Hamas is underground, they got all these hostages and whatnot? We're going to take your word for it. As far as I'm concerned, that could just be a bunch of staged bullshit. Not saying entirely that the attacks that happened, that Israel allowed to happen. Nobody died and nothing happened. I'm not going that far, but I'm just saying that how do we know? That we're not, that the general public is being tricked into thinking that Hamas has got all these hostages underground and they're attacking a Hamas base at a hospital, so we don't mean to kill all those sick men, women, and children there. As long as they have that, they can get, they can continue telling everybody, well, we've got to continue bombing because Hamas still has the hostages and they're still underground. It just reeks of bullshit. It reeks of bullshit. They get... I'm wondering, U.S. gives money to Hamas. I'm curious about this. I'm sure that Google will probably hide it anyway. I mean, our politics are staged anyways, so either way, we just know that if these assholes are, living rich lifestyles and whatnot. And not giving a shit about the Palestinians. We know that they are not fighting for them, but are just a controlled opposition group. The unemployment rate in Gaza is 47%, and more than 80% of its population lives in poverty, according to the United Nations. Hamas, however, has funded an armed force of thousands equipped with rockets and drones and built a vast web of tunnels under Gaza. Estimates of its annual military budget range from $100 million to $350 million, according to Israeli and Palestinian sources. Where does that cash come from? Since coming to power in the Gaza Strip, Hamas has filled its coffers with hundreds of millions in international aid, overt and covert injections of cash from Iran and other ideological partners, as well as cryptocurrency taxes, extortion, smuggling, according to current and former U.S. officials and regional experts. Much of the money is public and legal, including large sums of financial aid from Qatar via the United Nations. Gee, I wonder why they would give Hamas money. An arrangement encouraged and approved by Israel. But that money never winds up in these salaries for civil servants or fuel. Some of it, I'm sure, provides cash to needy families. Yeah, I'm sure. Again, they fund this group because it's their boogeyman group, so they can continue doing what they're doing. They're evil. Some of it is less than legal. So anyways, yeah, I am fucking sure that Israel tells the truth. But anyways, whatever. False flag history. Let's look this up. Let's see where this takes us. This is 2022. The term false flag goes back at least to the age of piracy, when pirate ships would fly a deceptive flag of a friendly or neutral state to lure their prey within striking distance before running up to Jolly Roger and attacking. In modern usage, a false flag operation is a deliberately planned ruse to make it seem like a state has been attacked, thereby justifying retaliatory military operations against a purported offender. But the U.S. and Israel and the U.K., they would never do things like that today. The Japanese Kwantung Army used such an operation to justify the takeover of Manchuria. On September 18, 1831, a Japanese operative planted dynamite along the tracks of the Japanese-controlled South Manchuria Railway. The resulting explosion did little damage, but Japanese inspectors, in a sham investigation... Oh, yeah, they're the only ones that do sham investigations. So they're not doing it today. Accused Chinese nationalists with planning and executing the attack. Using this event as pretext, the Kwantung Army proceeded to occupy Manchuria and set up a puppet state, Manchukuo, under Japanese control. The League of Nations conducted its own investigation, and the resulting report exposed Japanese culpability in the scheme. Japan rejected the report and withdrew from the League of Nations in response. Germany also used the false flag operation before its attack on Poland, which initiated World War II in Europe. In what is now known as the Gleiwitz incident, Gestapo operatives dressed in Polish army uniforms. Only Germans would do that. Back in the 30s, of course, it doesn't, Now it's just, only Islam would do such a thing. Gestapo operatives dressed in Polish army uniforms seized a radio station in Gleiwitz on German territory and broadcast a fake message in Polish. The operatives left a corpse at the scene to make it appear that a Polish saboteur had been shot while attacking the station. In reality, the dead man was an innocent local who was shot by the Gestapo and dressed in a Polish uniform for the purpose. Oh, gee. Oh, man, that's shocking. This was one of many staged incidents along the German-Polish border and was used by Hitler, who had unjustly accused Polish authorities of ethnic cleansing of German-speaking Poles, to justify the Nazi invasion of Poland, which, of course, had been planned many months earlier. People think, and I bring this up to people like at my work and stuff like that, and it usually gets them to shut up when they try to tell me how, I'm just, I'm making all this up. I'm a conspiracy kook. I revealed this in history. This is a big part of history, and they don't know what to say. It'd be pretty moronic to say that this doesn't go on today, because if it worked back then to some degree, some false flags ended up in failure. But to say that governments would never attempt to do these kind of things because we're in the 21st century, we're more civilized now, is just you're being a naive idiot. The Soviet Union also used the false flag operation to initiate hostilities in the Russo-Finnish War. On November 26, 1939, Red Army forces shelled the village of Mainila. The 7 rounds landed just 800 meters inside Soviet territory, but Soviet authorities claimed Finnish forces had fired the shots, supposedly causing several casualties in the village. The Finnish government offered to submit to a neutral investigation of the incident, but Stalin rejected the offer. 4 days later, Red Army forces rolled into Finland, beginning a war that would not end until mid-March with a negotiated settlement that ceded roughly 10% of Finnish territory to the Soviet Union. Vladimir Putin has used the same playbook. Putin trumped up allegations of Ukrainian shelling and ethnic cleansing amounting to genocide in the eastern breakaway territory of Donbas to justify an attack by upwards of 190,000 Russian army troops in western Russia and Belarus into Ukraine. President Joe Biden got ahead of the curve, warning of Russia's intended use of a false flag operation to justify a military assault. Says, the U.S. has never done anything like that. Joe Biden must be a conspiracy theorist. How dare he warn of Russia using a false flag to justify a military assault? Because that's what they call over here. That's what they call us when we suggest that the United States or Israel or any of our governments or countries would do something like that. They call us conspiracy kooks. Not entirely sure of if Putin committed the false flag or not. Probably, because these governments at the top are all run by the same bastards, same fucking people. So, Britannica. Anti-Defamation League. Harmful, militant event or action that is designed to appear as though perpetrated by someone other than the person or group responsible for it. Co-opted by conspiracy theorists. Yeah, whatever. So anyway, I wanted to look up well, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to waste your time on that. I remember something like that. Certain people were told or didn't show up on 9/11 that worked there, whatnot. But maybe I'll have to find it. I sort of just jumped a little too soon on that one. But, Operation Northwoods, people who, all you who watch this channel obviously probably know about this, but it was a false flag operation proposed by the U.S. Department of Defense in 1962, called for CIA operatives to both stage and commit acts of terrorism against American military and civilian targets, blaming them on the Cuban government, using it to justify a war against Cuba. But, if you question that they're still doing that, you're called a conspiracy theorist. If I came up with something like this, proposed it to the government, and then this many years later, something like this happens or something, and they investigate me for that since I came up with an idea of this, they would be totally justified in investigating me because, there's the history behind to back up the suspicion that I did something like this, that I committed a false flag attack or something. So it would be idiotic. It would be stupid to call people conspiracy theorists, being suspicious of their governments, if the media and all this stuff coming out, especially with this Israeli Hamas deal, there's more questions than answers. There's all these holes and contradictions with the official narrative. You're totally justified in being suspicious if that government has had a history of either attempting or actually doing something like a false flag attack. The possibilities detailed in the document included the remote control of civilian aircraft, which would be secretly repainted as U.S. Air Force plane, a fabricated shoot-down of a U.S. Air Force fighter aircraft off the coast of Cuba, the possible assassination of Cuban immigrants, sinking boats of Cuban refugees in the high seas, blowing up a U.S. ship, and orchestrating terrorism in U.S. cities. Proposals were rejected by President John F. Kennedy. Yeah, and he was the one president who actually got shot. I wonder by who. So there's Operation Northwoods. The operation proposed creating public support for a war against Cuba. by blaming the Cuban government for terrorist acts that would be perpetrated by the U.S. government. To this end, Operation Northwood's proposals recommended hijackings and bombings. Oh, gee. Followed by the introduction of false evidence. False evidence. So, yeah. But not going on today. Absolutely impossible. That would implicate the Cuban government. It stated the desired result from the execution of this plan would be to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering defensible grievances from a rash and irresponsible government of Cuba, and to develop an international image of a Cuban threat to peace in the Western Hemisphere, kind of like what we did to the Muslim world over and, to justify going over to Afghanistan and Iraq. Several other proposals were included within Operation Northwoods, including real or simulated actions against various U.S. military and civilian targets. The operation recommended developing a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even in Washington, which involved the bombing of civilian targets, which was to be blamed on the Cuban government to paint a false image of Fidel Castro and misinform the American public. They would never do that, our government. The plan was drafted by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, signed by Chairman Lemnitzer, and sent to the Secretary of Defense. Although part of the U.S. government's anti-communist Cuban project, Operation Northwoods was never officially accepted. It was authorized by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but then rejected by President Kennedy. Again, I think a little more than a year later, he was shot dead. None of the false flag operations became active under the auspices of the Operation Northwoods proposals. Oh, I'm sure. Maybe not in the case of Cuba, but with other situations. Such as the Gulf of Tonkin. If I spelled that right. The lie that sparked the Vietnam War. In August 1964, the U.S. entered the Vietnam War based on reports of an unprovoked attack in the Gulf of Tonkin, which the president knew were false. In August 1964, the American destroyer USS Maddox was stationed in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of North Vietnam. That month, this ship was involved in two events collectively referred to as the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which changed the course of modern history in ways that reverberate to this day. On August 2nd, it was attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats, and then 2 days later, on August 4th, the Johnson administration claimed that it had been attacked again. After the second attack, the U.S. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution almost unanimously, allowing the federal government to take all necessary measures to protect the U.S. forces in Vietnam. It was tantamount to a declaration of war, but it was based on a lie. After decades of public skepticism and government secrecy, the truth finally came out. In the early 2000s, nearly 200 documents were declassified and released by the NSA. They showed that there was no attack on August 4th. U.S. officials had distorted the truth. But, it said in that Wikipedia article that the government would never, at least the stuff regarding Operation Northwoods, but basically trying to, tell us that, it was a proposed plan, but they would never do anything out of that document. Officials had distorted the truth about the Gulf of Tonkin incident for their own gains and perhaps for Johnson's own political prospects, which, it's above Johnson. This lie jump-started a war that would claim 58,220 American and more than 3 million Vietnamese lives. After the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, President Lyndon B. Johnson and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara solely increased military pressure on the coast of North Vietnam. So, blah, 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 So, interesting thing about John F. Kennedy, is the one who, filmed the footage. Abraham Zapruder. This is a little bit off subject. Well, not really, because the bastard too, We're behind the John F. Kennedy. We're also behind the other stuff, but this is interesting. Abraham Zapruder. American manufacturer of women's clothing, best known for his home movie documenting the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. At the time of the assassination, Zapruder was an admirer of President Kennedy. I'm sure he was. He was also a Jew as well. 33rd degree. What do you know? Makes me wonder how much of that assassination, how big the rabbit hole goes with that incident. So, I suppose I'm gonna put this up for now, but Levant affair, so
that Israel had a hand in uprooting them. After the 1948 war, there was mounting popular hostility towards the Jews in Iraq. 5 bombs exploded in Jewish sites. The series of bombs created a panic which led more and more Jews to register to leave the country. I met an elderly friend of my mother's, an Iraqi Jew called Yaakov Karkukli, who had been in the Zionist underground. One member of his group, Yosef Basri, a very, very intelligent Jewish lawyer, and his assistant, Shalom Saleh Shalom, were responsible for 3 out of the 5 bombs. Basri's controller was an Israeli intelligence officer named Max Binet, who was based in
Tehran. Maybe I should show you one more thing. I have it up here. And I have this book, so I can verify. For you Christian Zionists out there that think, God is behind, Israel and everything. Take a look at this. This is on Anton LaVey, who was a Jew, real name Howard Stanton Levy. His autobiography contains some tidbits that most may not know. For example, he openly describes himself as a Zionist operative on the back cover of his book, The Secret Life of a Satanist. This book itself gives further detail on how gun runners procured surplus rifles that were located and shipped out to Jewish terrorists like the Stern Gang in Ergun. When the Satanic Bible was released, LaVey shared it with Asav Dayan, son of Defense Minister Moshe Dayan, who proclaimed it perfectly suited for conditions in Israel, gives a whole new insight into the concept of the synagogue of Satan. Though friends, he became involved with militant Israeli groups, some of which were running guns to the newly emerged nation. Organizations with names like Bitar, Hashimer, Hatzer, I'm probably pronouncing all that wrong, Pol Zion, the Stern Gang, and Ergen, some of which had already been likened to the Nazis due to their ferocious tactics. Paradoxically, at the same time, LaVey was playing piano for reunions for the veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, those Americans whose idealism led them to Spain in the 30s to fight for what they thought right, though irrevocably branded as leftists. It was here Anton met men like Dalton Trumbo and Alva Bessie, two of the most notorious members of the Hollywood Ten. Bessie worked lights at the gatherings, unable to find work anywhere else. Anton's knowledge that he was being filmed by the FBI as he walked into the meeting halls didn't seem to deter him. Interesting. Anton saw that the Red Scare was not far removed from the church-induced hysteria which had caused thousands to be burned at the stake as witches and sorcerers, simply because they threatened the wrong people. His sympathy for groups labeled commies by prevailing conditions was undisguised. Anton's receptive manner was invigorating to the rejected patriots. He listened to disenchanted men sing songs about Major Drama Brunette with little more input than a scratchy old recording. Anton would bring new life to their music. They trusted Anton, were rejuvenated by his willingness to learn and the fervor of his playing. The outcasts Anton played for appreciated his enthusiasm and regaled with the stories of partisans who fought in the international brigades, hoping that some bit of them would survive through him. LaVey recalls, quote, "The whole thing was very much like the escapades in old movies like The Woman on Pier 13. There were two main rendezvous spots in San Francisco, a Jewish community center and a workers' collective downtown, where fellows would come in off the boat, went right down to meet contacts in the library of one of these places. I would be hired to play for a fashion show or a variety show. Then I'd get through and go right down to the docks where crates of guns were being loaded onto ships to Israel." Oh, yeah, but that was God moving behind that. Many of the guns were ones that had been liberated during the war by American soldiers and were slated as DWAT or DWAT. That means deactivated war trophies. But before they had a chance to be officially deactivated, they were cosmolined up and sent to Israel. They'd wind up in crate marked menorahs or something, mostly German MP40s. And P-38s, but even Japanese Nambus, anything could get their hands on. Afterwards, I'd get letters of praise from the fashion show organizers saying how much I'd added to their presentation. Little did they know what I'd been doing after their show. Quote, "These Zionist gun runners could best be called ideological mercenaries. They had a sense of, well, what I'm doing may not make a hell of a lot of difference, but at least I'm doing what I know best. Many seem more concerned about refining and perfecting innovative weapons technology that they were experimenting with than who their new relay or explosive was blowing up, though. I met Zionists that were right out of European prisons, not Nazi concentration camps, other prisons, that had lines of bullet scars up the backs of their legs from machine gun fire. By that time, they were sort of ambivalent about the Nazis. Many of them had been decorated in World War I on the side of Germany, then fought in Spain against Germany, only to form dubious alliances with Nazis against the British in Palestine, then were fighting to affirm the new state of Israel. Dubious alliances with Nazis against the British in Palestine. There was always a lot of that, more than people have until recently even wanting to hear. There's a book called Zionism and the Age of the Dictators that confirms many of my suspicions about exactly what was going on between Zionism and Nazi Germany. Quote, "I felt the culmination of that whole episode in my life many years later, shortly after the Satanic Bible came out. I met with Asaf Dayan, actor, son of Israel's legendary defense minister Moshe Dayan, and he was glowing about the book, agreed with everything in it. He said it was exactly the philosophy they practiced, were forced to practice in modern Israel." You hear that, you Christian Zionists? You mean the religion that they were forced to practice, according to Asaf Dayan, a son of the defense minister Moshe Dayan, was Satanism? He extended an invitation for me to stay at his family home in Tel Aviv whenever I wished, of course. LaVey was also a huge fan of the Protocols of Zion, proclaiming what's not to like. The first time I read the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, my instinctive reaction was, so what's wrong with that? Isn't that the way any master plan should work? Doesn't the public deserve, nay, demand such despotism? So you can read this if you want, but yeah, you Christian Zionists like that Good Fight Ministries, Joel Schimmel, who always talks about Aleister Crowley and then the Satanists in Hollywood, won't expose the Satanism in Israel. Take care.